I'm Femi OK, and you're in the stream. Today, a lineup of international journalists are standing by to tell us how they chronicle one of the most controversial US presidents in history.
I'm Malika Bilal, and we want to know, how have the politics and personality of Donald Trump been covered in your part of the world? Too much, too little, too critical, or perhaps too favorably? Share your thoughts on our YouTube chat, and as always, on Twitter at AJStream.
The race to midterm elections, which also mark the halfway point for President Trump's 4 years in office, is heating up. A new Supreme Court nominee is embroiled in scandal, recovery from a hurricane, controversial foreign policy announcements, and of course, an investigation into the US president continues in the background. That's just this week.
That's right, there's no shortage of daily news. But since January 2017, American economic, social, and foreign policies have all changed significantly. And the international reaction to those changes has been diverse. The world press has variously lampooned, applauded, and often scolded a president who has captured headlines like no other before.
So much to discuss with the journalists today. Joining us from New York, we have Danielle Ziri. She's a correspondent for Can 11, that's the Israeli Broadcasting Corporation, and she freelances as a TV and print journalist for other outlets. Also in New York, Namrata Bra is a freelance journalist and consultant, and she was the former bureau chief for NDTV, and that's the Indian network New Delhi Television.
Here with us on set, Raquel Crohimbul is the Washington correspondent for the Brazilian channel Globo News. And Abderrahim Pucara is the Washington, D.C. bureau chief for Al Jazeera International. He also hosts the program Min Washington, that's From Washington, on Al Jazeera Arabic. Thank you all for being here in the stream. I want to start with a headline. The news of the day, that's also been the news for a few weeks and a few months. This is ABC News headline: Trump not concerned about Manafort cooperation. And of course, Manafort referring to his former campaign manager. And this is in the Russia probe. So we actually got quite a few tweets from Russians about how this presidency is covered there. This is Aresa, who says, in Russia, the mainstream media, opposition, describes Trump as an aggressive but still very patriotic president who not only does good for the U.S., but he keeps its reputation as a torch of freedom for those who live under dictatorship. So that is one view. But here's another from someone else who covers Russia. This is from the editor of the Moscow Times, Jonathan Brown, and here's what he told the stream.
There's also an interesting phenomenon here in Russia around the Mueller probe and the investigation into Trump's collusion with Russia. There's an assumption that that story is as big here in Moscow as it would be in the United States, but that just hasn't been the case. In the States, this is a fiery and urgent story about the status and the health of US democracy. And in the meantime, there's very little that Russian journalists can be contributing to that story, with some exceptions. In the States, this is referred to as the Russia story, but from here, this really looks like an internal, almost domestic US story.
Interesting to hear that difference between how it's covered in the U.S. and how it is covered in Russia. Raquel, of course, Russia has topped headlines all over the world. Where's the interest for Brazilian viewers and audiences? Are they as interested?
Yes, definitely they are interested in this topic because it has to do with the election, mainly because it has to do with the future of the President of the United States. So all the time we have some headline, like, for example, just recently when Manafort was found guilty, in the same day, in another story, Cohen was pled guilty. That day, the biggest, what I try to show to my audience is like a broadly view of the whole situation, right? Not just specific case, but how this can have an implication for the presidency. And this is what they try to talk. So that day, they were interested in talk about impeachment. Is that actually now do have a ground for an impeachment case in the Congress? So this is what I was in the White House the day after that. And that was my question in the briefing. Other than everybody was trying to talk more specific. Did he know about the tape, or didn't he know when he gave the payment, or, you know? So we try to get more broadly a view of this situation for our audience, but definitely it's something that they are paying close attention in Brazil as well.
Danielle, I see you nodding. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear Raquel talk about this because when I look at it from my perspective or my viewers back in Israel, I think they do care about it because anything that happens in Washington is always something that Israelis are interested in knowing about because it's Israel's biggest ally, because the president is such an influential person in Israelis' daily lives. Decisions that are made in Washington regarding Israel are very important for the daily lives of people there. So that's very important to them, but I think they care far more about what the president does for Israel, whether it's a good or bad thing, but they care more about that than what's going on in the US until it becomes very real. So let's say tomorrow there's a motion to impeach Donald Trump, that's going to become very real for them. Until then, all the little developments, we cover them and we have them on our show every single night. Our Washington correspondent, Nathan Gutman, is doing a great job at that and bringing really everything that is going on, whether it is the Omarosa book or anything else. But it's definitely something that, although we are covering, Israelis might not be as focused on as they are on something that relates more to them, like moving the embassy, for example.
Just following up on Danielle's point there, I think there's a sense of Trump fatigue, which is also set in a lot of viewers outside of US, maybe even in the US. Every tweet that made the headlines, I think there was virtually 1 year where there were 3 news headlines in India which were generated only by Donald Trump's tweets every single day. But I think that has slowed down considerably. There's also another point I just want to take off on that excerpt you showed of the journalist in Russia saying this has become a local political story. And when impeachment, for instance, happens, that will become a global story. And I think that's interesting as well with the nuance of how journalists here as well as in India are being now treated. So over here, President Trump has been labeling everyone fake news from the time he got in office. But in India, there's been almost Kremlinization of media. And it's Kremlinization, not criminalization, but a lot of control over what the state media gives out. So I think the ability to question every aspect in that sense has also become controlled.
Abdurrahim, I want to play a little clip of Al Jazeera Arabic and a story that they're fascinated by. I'm not going to spoil the surprise, and I'm just going to say, roll the clip.
Michael Cohen previously mentioned that he paid adult film star Stormy Daniels to remain silent about the details of her relationship with President Trump years ago. He also was the link between another unnamed adult film star to whom he paid money for her relationship with Elliot Brody, who impregnated her.
This sounds like those soap operas. In the last episode of the Trump administration, this is what happened. It's like the pre-titles to the next episode. Why is your audience so fascinated by this?
It's totally fascinating, and as opposed to what we heard about places like India, there is no Trump interest fatigue in the Middle East. It just keeps coming. Everything that happens here in Washington, D.C. relating to Trump, people keep to be interested. And, you know, Danielle, for example, she talked about the situation in Israel. In the environment, the countries around Israel, there's this impression that all Israelis love Donald Trump because of all the things that he's done for Israel, including, you know, moving the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. In the Arab or the Farsi Middle East, a lot of people view Trump with trepidation, but he also, in their eyes, knows how to stay in the headlines, and he's doing it every day. And people are wondering, what is the secret? What is the recipe that he's following to be able to stay in the headlines? Other than that, all roads these days from the Middle East lead to the White House, to Trump.
And I just want to add something.
Jump in. Okay.
It's just very quickly, because we have an election in Brazil coming up in a few weeks, right? And usually, as our job as a correspondent, slow down a little bit because our focus is in Brazil. But with Trump, he managed to be in the headline still every day. Just 2 days ago, the tariffs on China, not the biggest yet, right? They were announced on Chinese products. So he's still on the headlines every day in Brazil, even though we are going through a very polarized election over there.
I mean, you know, like my understanding of the situation in Brazil is that it has some similarities with the United States in terms of the candidates. There's one particular candidate who is a nationalist firebrand, if you will, and he's bent on introducing nationalist policies. A lot of people are comparing him with Trump. And so that's a source of the interest maybe in Brazil. In the Middle East, there are other sources of interest, is that his policies perhaps affect more directly the Middle East than they do places in Latin America, such as Brazil.
Yeah.
I just want to jump in about what Abderrahim said about kind of the vision or the perception that in Israel people are very much behind Trump because he's doing things that are perceived to be good for Israel or good for the Jewish community. So it's absolutely true. There's definitely that perception, and I can tell you that I'm coming back from a month and a half in Israel over the summer, and I've had the chance to actually talk to my viewers, talk to the public, and kind of hear what they're saying. And there is that kind of idea of, oh, but he's good for us. He's moving the embassy and he's, you know, defending and his daughter is Jewish. And so all these kind of things come into play. And I think that more and more so what I've tried to bring them is, okay, let's say he's good for Israel. Let's say the U.S. embassy move is a good thing. Why did he do it? Let's go back and dig. Is it a love of the Jewish people, a love of Israel, or is it to please the evangelicals that are standing behind that? And kind of try to connect them to, okay, let's see what the values behind it are. And is it a leader that comes in with strong beliefs regarding Israel, or is it someone who right now it's good for him to be pro-Israel and tomorrow it might not be good? And then it launches a whole discussion of what is a good friend to Israel. There's a lot of talk every time there's an election in the U.S. People say we want a president who's good for Israel. What does good for Israel mean?
If I may interrupt you, this is Abderrahim again. Yeah. Question. To the extent that there are or there may be people who do not like Donald Trump in Israel, what are the reasons why they would say that they don't like him?
Yeah, so interesting question. Basically, even though the perception is that everyone loves Trump in Israel, and might be a certain level of that, I think there's also a lot of confusion that goes with it. Because on one hand, yes, he's moving the embassy. Yes, he's kind of, you know, at the UN through Nikki Haley and through things that have been said, he's perceived as being standing up to people who are bashing Israel. At the same time, people in Israel are very confused with certain policies like separating kids from parents at the border, which is completely against Jewish values, completely against what, you know, the nature of what Israeli people have and what they feel in their country. Family is above everything in Israel, and I think throughout the Middle East, and it's something that's very, very important. So there's definitely that confusion of, okay, he's good for us, but hold on a second. What is he doing inside the U.S. and should we take a closer look at that? That's what I want to bring.
I'm just going to ask you all.
So I want to jump in here because I want to bring our community in. Namrata, I hear you, but I want to bring our community in, and I'll go to you with this because one of the things that we all raised here among our panelists is there's this idea of, is Trump good for us, meaning that country that you're covering, or is he not? Do our candidates that are running for elections represent Trump? Do they resemble Trump? I wanted to bring in the view from Canada. This is David, who says, Trump has become a lens through which we view our own politics, i.e., is Ford Trump or not? This is, of course, remember, in Canada. Answer, sort of. And a strategic consideration for domestic concerns, like, does Trump help Trudeau? Answer, probably for now as a foil or a point of favorable comparison. But he goes on to say, I think there's a risk, especially with an election coming up in Canada, of us reaching a point of oversaturation and fatigue, and even the normalization of absurdity, since we only have so much energy, so much time, and so much to ram into. Raquel, I wanted to go to you with this because, as you mentioned, your election is coming up, and there are those comparisons with a candidate that is like Trump, but is there a danger in that for your viewers, the comparison analysis?
Well, I think the comparisons are fair. They are pretty similar. And actually, it seems like the Brazilian candidate Bolsonaro, he's bringing from the Trump's book to our election, a lot of the phrases, a lot of the inflammatory comments and rhetoric, and they have a pretty similar agenda. They are law and order candidates. He is a far-wing, right-wing candidate, and he's also trying to change the status quo in Brazil. And right now in Brazil, I think what would impact the election is because Brazilians are very resentful with our political and economical situation, and they don't trust anymore the politicians. So, and he's a little bit in that sense trying to fight all of this, like Trump did. I'm going to fight corruption, and I'm different. I'm not involved in any case, in corruption case in Brazil. So, but I think the comparison is fair. Even, like, I have to say something on immigration. Just recently, he said that immigrants, refugees that comes from Haiti are actually bringing disease to Brazil. And Trump just said that a few days ago, a little earlier than that, that immigrants from Haiti all have AIDS. So
So, Raquel, it's this immigration issue that actually touches many countries around the world. The immigration issue and the approach that the US is having has ripples around the world, particularly in India. Namrata, you were reporting on Indians, and a large number of them being the recipients of a highly skilled visa known as the H-1B visa. So this is a little clip of you reporting about this. Have a look.
Now, how does it affect Indians particularly? I think it's no secret, and we've spoken about this extensively, that Indians are the largest recipients of the H-1B visas. 85,000 get approval every single year, out of which 70%, as I mentioned, goes to Indians in terms of the quota system. All that is changing. We earlier talked about how the minimum requirement of salaries is also going to be upped from $60,000 to perhaps as much as $120,000 in the next draft of this final legislation for H-1B.
So, Namrata, this idea of immigration and fewer people being allowed to come into the US, it's impacting so many people in different ways, with the travel ban, with visas being, fewer visas being available. So you did that story, and how did India react?
I think this has been a burning issue for India, but what's interesting is that the economic and the immigration aspect of this having an impact on actual jobs has become the real source of tension between the two countries. Now, don't get me wrong, there's all this romance between Trump and Modi, that's the Indian Prime Minister, but the underlying factors that now are the key prickling points are, one, the visas, how it impacts the Indian IT industry and the jobs in the US, which is a huge part of the Indian GDP. Second, what happens in terms of the sanctions impact on India? Steel and aluminum prices are going up. Oil sanctions against Iran are a key problem for India because we import oil from Iran. We are the world's third largest importer of oil. And third, our defense deals. India is actually trying to explore other marriages here. We just recently inked a $2.2 billion deal with Russia. We are in the process of signing a $5.8 billion deal for air defense missile systems as well. And Putin and Modi are going to be meeting early next month. So what I think is the bottom line in all this is that Trump has forced every single marriage in the international diplomatic community to relook at each other, because he's kind of the uncomfortable third person in the marriage. So everyone's recalibrating how they deal with the rest of the world.
Milika.
I wanted to play this video comment because you are speaking of the view from India. This is actually a comment we got from Verghese George. He's the associate editor of The Hindu here in Washington, D.C. And he's also the author of an upcoming book. And that book is called Open Embrace, India-U.S. Ties in the Modi-Trump Era. Here's what he told the stream.
For one, both of them refer to themselves in third person. In fact, my first report on Modi in the year 2007 was about how he named himself in third person 27 times in a 30-minute campaign speech. Both are trying to redefine their respective countries based on two questions. Who are we and who is our enemy? Prime Minister Modi succeeded the first non-Hindu Prime Minister of India, and President Trump succeeded the first non-white President of the United States, both riding a wave of religious nationalism.
So, Abdurrahim, some people saw that as a budding bromance. We've seen that speculation with other leaders as well, and often there's talk of how is Trump going to get along with this leader, insert leader's name here. How do you cover that? How did you cover the Prime Minister Modi's visit to the U.S.? How do you cover his visits with other leaders?
Well, I mean, we covered it from so many different angles. One particular angle is that, you know, now there are around the world, there's a type of leader called birds of a feather. So basically, one, they could be seen in India with Modi, could be seen with Duterte in the Philippines, it could be seen with Sisi in Egypt, many other parts of the world. But you know, what I would like to say here applies to both the issue of Modi, but also to the previous topic that you talked about, immigration. I mean, whatever Trump does, let's say with immigration, for example, whatever he does here in the United States, it finds interest even in countries that are separated from the United States by oceans. There's obviously a global issue of immigration, people immigrating or trying to get to Europe from as far afield as the Congo, Kurdistan, many of them drowning in the Mediterranean in the process. But when they hear President Trump's pronouncements on immigrants from Central America, you know, all of a sudden geography becomes very blurred. It doesn't matter which part of the world he's talking about. What matters is the issue. And the same thing for these leaders. When they see the way he welcomed Modi and the affinity between him and Modi, they all aspire, I'm sure, they all aspire to be Modis being embraced by Donald Trump. The quote from Bob Woodward's new book that Sisi in Egypt was actually so worried about everything that's going on here in terms of the investigation, the Mueller investigation, that he asked Donald Trump, are you going to last? Because a lot of these leaders, they base their policies on what Donald Trump does or says.
Yeah, he is the president of the most important and powerful country in Earth, and everything he does, it is important. But now, just going back a little bit to what I was talking about Bolsonaro before, something I forgot to mention, he is being advised by Bolton. You know, so that is just a picture of his son with Bolton, and so that is a fair comparison, right? Yeah.
All right. I want to get everybody's take on this. I'm going to ask you to be very brief. Namrata, you can start. The most challenging part of covering President Trump and the U.S. administration right now is, it's almost like you're going to finish my sentence for me. Namrata, you start.
A transactional aspect to this. You know, he's as good as his last trade. They say that on Wall Street, it seems very aligned to the President of the United States as well. And I think it's brought in this huge degree of unpredictability in global foreign policy. My colleague earlier was talking about
I hear you, Danielle. Danielle, thank you. Thank you. It's transactional. All right. I need to get everyone in, so be brief. Danielle, the most challenging part of your job.
I would say that the most challenging part of my job is to show a fuller picture, like Raquel said, to show the domestic things that are happening with Trump. Because even though Israelis or Israeli viewers don't think that maybe that affects them, in a way I think it does. I think that decisions that are made here in the U.S. definitely affect them, and they should know about it to make their own opinion of it.
Raquel, can you deal with 30 seconds? Yes. You can do it.
I think the cycle of the news is just incredible, crazy. It's just, he's generating news every other minute. Is changing, so my story is changing all the time. And he's in the middle of this. It's important news. He's challenging the world's order.
I should answer you with a tweet, just like President Donald Trump does, and he changes the news cycle.
Right.
Yes.
That's a challenge.
All the time.
Raquel, Abdurrahim, Namrata, Danielle, thank you so much to talk about. You have a job for life, or at least until 2020. Malika.
I'll end with this comment from YouTube. This is Jane, who writes in Live Australia. He does not dominate the news. There may be a reference to him if it is relevant to trade or policy. If he's spoken about, it is almost unanimously with scorn, disbelief, and laughter.
Oh, so much more to talk about. You can always find Malika and myself online on Twitter at AJStream. Guests, thank you very much. Get back to work. It's always busy. See you online.